All right, so let's get this started. I'm super thrilled with what I can present today, which is a really amazing feature that potentially revolutionizes how you will be using NX in existing monorepos as well as new monorepos. But before we jump right in, who am I? My name is Juri Strumpflohner. I'm the Senior Director of Developer Experience at NX. I'm also a Google Developer Expert and an ACAD instructor. But enough intro, let's jump right into code. So what I have here is a plain normal PNPM monorepo workspace. Now I chose to use PNPM, but you can use NPM workspace or Yarn workspace. It would work the same way. Now adding NX into such a reality is actually pretty straightforward. So you want to make it as easy as possible. So today all you need to do is run PNPM DLX or MPX if you're using an NPM workspace and exit latest in it. And this will scan your workspace and set up all the necessary stuff and ask you a couple of questions. Now in the new version, starting with NX version 18, you also get a question about plugins. We will come back to this in my talk, but for now let's ignore this and just deselect all of them to have a very, very simple setup to get started with. You will then get a couple of questions asked about the scripts that you have in your workspace, which I cut out here for the sake of making this a bit faster. But in the end, what we get is just a couple of changes in our file system. So first of all, we get NX installed as a dependency. We also get here an NX.json setup with a couple of useful configurations here. So if we look at the NX.json here in this specific case, here we get a build pipeline setup. First of all, which targets are cacheable. So in our case, we have build, test, and lint. Now you can flip them as you like. You can add multiple ones. We also defined what is called here a task pipeline, meaning that if we have a dependent project, then if you run build on the parent project, it will trigger the build automatically for child projects. So common things that in a monorepo you would want to have. Now, how does this work now? Well, basically here we have in this monorepo a React Vite app. So this has been generated with the Vite CLI. We have a Remix app, which has been generated with the Remix CLI. And these come with their package JSON and dependencies as you would expect here. Now, since we have added NX, we can now just run all of these through the NX pipeline. And so rather than running something like PNPM filter, build, and React Vite here, we just run PNPM NX build React Vite, where React Vite here is the name of our project here. And so if I run this, this is going to trigger this specific package JSON script and run it through just as normal. Now, the important part is since we have defined it to be cacheable, you get caching now out of the box. Also notice, as we have said before, it ran also the build of a dependent project, which was automatically being recognized. So here, our React Vite project is dependent on a shared UI project, which is also living in this workspace, which needed to be built beforehand. And so that automatically happened with NX. And so you can see the adoption here in such a workspace is pretty straightforward. It's very minimal, but you already get a lot of benefits in the sense of more advanced task scheduling, which run in parallel in a more advanced fashion, taking into account also these dependencies between projects, and you get caching. That's it. But NX was actually always more. So NX lives in a huge ecosystem, and whenever we work with our clients in more enterprise field, it gets more complicated than just having a couple package JSON files. There's talk about consistency, about ease of setup, about easy onboarding, and scalability and maintainability in general. So NX is also known for its plugins. So this is the overall structure that we see in terms of the architecture of NX. At the very bottom, you see that NX block, which is the one we just used in that PNPM monorepo. But the plugins actually provide a lot of value. Now, these are just NPM packages, but are very technology specific. So we can have some for React, for Angular, for Vite, for Vue, and so on, even for backend technologies. And usually these plugins augment your workspace by providing you automations. And so far that has been generators for easy code scaffolding, which can help with consistency in the setup. We have executors, which is basically a kind of a wrapper around the actual logic that is being run when you run, for instance, the build of a project, the serving of a project. So it does a bit more to make sure it works nicely in a monorepo. And we also have something that's called code migrations, which is pretty much undervalued, to be honest, which automatically updates your code base and brings you to the next version, limiting and lowering the effort that you have on your end. So again, as said, these are just NPM packages. And so once you add them to your workspace, you now have these generators at disposal that allow you to generate something, or you have these kind of executors, those task running wrappers at disposal that allow you to easily build a TypeScript project, a React project, Next project, depending on the plugin you're basically using. So plugins are extremely powerful, and we've seen these being adopted at huge enterprise at scale. So they remove usually the friction between integrating tools into your workspace. They allow you to focus building and shipping features, mainly because of that. So you don't have to worry how React will integrate into Storybook and how Cypress or Playwright will hook into your app and make sure the app builds or serves beforehand. Things like that are already handled by those specific plugins. And that can help you increase productivity quite drastically. But clearly, there's also some learning curve, right? So it's no more just package JSON scripts, which at the same point, if you migrate to them, which is worthwhile, but if you migrate to them, it's kind of like a bit more tricky if you have an existing solution, existing reality, where you have, for instance, a PnPm workspace set up, and now you want to benefit from those plugins because you find them useful. And sometimes there's also a bit of that hidden logic, which comes with the abstraction layer, basically, that might be sometimes tricky to figure out. So don't get me wrong, NX plugins are here to stay. We find them extremely valuable, but it is about the balance between having more abstraction, more automation, more support, but a little reduced control about every little detail versus the no abstraction, no automation, or almost no automation, a bit less support, and you basically manage everything. You need to basically know what you're doing. And so this is the NX init scenario, which we have seen just before, demoed in a PnPm workspace. While this is more where the plugins are right now. Now, obviously, take this with a grain of salt, but it's just a visualization of how this is being distributed. So we at the NX team have been thinking about, like, what if plugins would be more like VS Code extensions? So for example, if you have an existing project in VS Code and you add the Playwright plugin, it will automatically detect that there is a Playwright config and enhance your existing workspace. So you get like those buttons alongside the test that allow you to easily run them with the click of a mouse. You get a potential test explorer view, depending on what the plugin actually wants you to do or how it wants you to help. So the key idea there is to enhance, but not really interfere, because you don't have to use the Playwright plugin, even though you have it installed. But you can, and it will help you and enhance your whole developer experience while working in a workspace with a Playwright setup. And this is exactly what NX Project Crystal is about. So let me explain. For instance, here we have a PnPm monorepo, the one that we have shown before, and we add the NX Vite plugin. Notice we have added a shorthand, which is the NX add command. You can also install it manually as an npm package and then configure it on your own, but this will already take care of some of that stuff. Notice also how there is the Vite config down there. And so the NX Vite plugin automatically detects that Vite config and enhances your workspace based on that. So let's have a look. So if you go back to our workspace here, I could run NX init again, and that automatically detects that there are these three plugins that could potentially apply to your workspace. Simply because there is a React Vite app, so the Vite plugin makes sense to have there. There's a Remix app, so the Remix plugin makes sense. And there is also some linting setup somewhere in here for instance, so that makes sense to also be added. Now I want to have it simple, and let me actually cancel this process and just add the Vite plugin to this workspace. So I use the NX latest add syntax and I add the NX Vite plugin. We will leave the rest of the workspace as is, so the Remix application will continue working as before. So once the plugin has been added, we can go and have a look what happened. So if you scroll down a bit, we now have in the NX JSON a plugins configuration, which mentions the NX Vite plugin here, and it defines a couple of options. So specifically the names of the build target, preview, test, serve, and serve static targets. So these are some targets that NX will automatically apply to a Vite project. Now, if we go back up to our React Vite project up here, we also see that NX kind of replaced some of the scripts in here in the package JSON. So rather than running Vite build, it ran now NX build. And further down here, there's also some other changes where it ran NX preview rather than here the Vite preview. Now you can opt out of that, but it allows you to potentially run the npm scripts while still benefiting from the caching, because now you run through the NX build approach, which has caching enabled. So what did this plugin do for us? Well, we could potentially remove here all of this linting and previewing and def and whatever, and just run with the tasks that NX automatically has inferred for a Vite plugin. So basically let the NX plugin take care of some of that. So how do we know what targets can be run on a project? Well, here we have our React Vite project, and we can run pnpm nx show project React Vite. Let me add here -- web to not get a JSON output, but rather a more viewable output here. And so this now shows me what different targets are available for my React Vite app. So NX found a build target, it found a serve target, a preview and serve static target. So why would I want to use this? Well, because here the build target automatically already configured all the caching, the inputs of the caching, the outputs of the caching, and it directly did that by reading from the React Vite project and the Vite config in specifically. So let me go back and show that directly in the project here. If you have NX console installed, which is highly recommended, you will even get some more enhancements, meaning you will see here the targets that are being inferred, so you can directly run them. You can run here the open product details or directly click here, which will give you the similar view that we have seen in the web interface, again showing you the different configurations that have happened here. So if I run pnpm nx build, even though I don't have a build script in here, and I use here React Vite, it will now run through the NX pipeline. It will build the dependent project as we have seen here, and it is cached, automatically being configured based on where Vite produced the artifacts and what files Vite reads into the compilation process. And specifically, the Vite config is an important part. While before you had to configure NX directly in terms of caching potentially for a project where it read the input or output, now we rely on the single source of truth, which is here the Vite config for a Vite project. And so if you look here, we inferred that Vite by default produces the output in a dist folder that is in the project root. But you can adjust that. So you can here add a build configuration, and for some reason, you could change this to my custom out. Now by saving this, NX automatically recognizes that, and now the caching has automatically been configured based on this new setting. So you don't really have to worry about NX behind the scenes and how you configure the cache and change it potentially in two different places, but NX will directly read it from this Vite config, just as Vite reads the Vite config or just as Webpack reads the Webpack config. So by adding the plugin, it allows us to automatically configure the tasks by inferring them from the Vite config and understanding what the Vite project allows you to do. It configures caching for you, specifically configures the caching inputs and outputs based on what the Vite config has configured inside. And there's potentially more that the plugin could do. So this is the minimum layer that you can add with such an NX plugin. Now, how do we know which tasks are available? We have seen that already briefly. So the project JSON or package JSON could potentially be empty. And so we can run that show command, which will show it in a web view, or we can have NX console installed, which again is highly recommended because it gives you much more benefits to work with it in an NX workspace, where we have these code lens features, as well as different buttons that allow you to then open that side panel view to directly inspect what targets are available there. Again, the NX JSON defines the names of these inferred targets, so you can potentially adopt these. So here, for instance, we have for a Next.js app, we see here the build, def, and start, and these are the ones that are being inferred in the next app. And below you see also the test for the Jest test, because there has been a Jest config in there, which is inferred automatically by the Jest plugin. Now, if you remove one of these plugins, the tasks simply are not being inferred, and you keep going with your package JSON or custom configuration. And this works exactly the same in a new workspace. So if you go here and create a new workspace, which I name here Project Crystal, and I choose pnpm. Again, you can choose whatever you like. And I choose here to have a React setup. I don't want to go with any specific ones, so with any specific framework, so I just go with a React Vite setup, and I want a monorepo. I'm gonna choose Vite. Let's go with Cypress here, CSS. So once the setup is complete, and for those that have already been using NX Workspace, this might be a bit more familiar. We have here a React app that is based on Vite, because that's what we chose. we have a Cypress test, again, what we chose during the setup phase. And so in this setup, we don't have any package.json, but we rather have the usual project.json files that you're accustomed with in an NX workspace. So in one that you're set up automatically from the get-go. And so the only difference here now that you might be wondering what happened is there are no targets. Because again, the configuration is very similar to what we have seen before. We now have the plugins defined at the more root level in NX.json. And again, these plugins automatically infer all the targets based on the Vite config. And so this helps greatly with the maintenance of these project.json files because you really just have to add things in here where you really want to override things. But all the default setup is already there for you. You don't have to duplicate it throughout the different projects, but you just add it when you really need it. Again, you can use the project details view. You will see, again, whatever is being run behind the scenes. Interestingly here also, and that was the same for the PNPM workspaces, we directly run the Vite build behind the scenes. So we are not doing a whole lot of wrapping, but we mostly pipe through the actual CLI behind the scenes. And so this greatly also helps with being more transparent. So to add some more things here, what we can do is we can add, for instance, the next plugin for NX. So let me here add NX latest, add NX next to add the next plugin to our workspace. And this will give us some more possibilities to add next applications, and we configure the next plugin to potentially recognize existing next apps that are within this workspace here. And so if we go and give a look, what happened is we got obviously the next plugin installed here. It also installed Next itself clearly. And if we scroll a bit down, we will see that we have the new Next plugin configured. Now, this gives us an opportunity to either via the command line or with NX console to generate a new Next application. So let me go ahead and say here Next app. The directory will be the apps Next app directory. Let me choose here, I want to have the app dir. Let's choose Playwright here. And we can leave the rest as is. And so here what we got is a new Next app generated into our workspace. It uses a normal Next config. Again, the project.json is empty. We can again see what targets are being inferred here, which will again directly rely on the Next config that we got generated here. And we also have a Playwright test, which works for that Next app. So you can see that whole experience that we were always kind of accustomed with the NX plugins still works in such a workspace, but is now enhanced. And so one thing that also greatly helps, which before was always kind of like a situation which we didn't really like and wanted to find ways to optimize, is it allows you to more easily migrate to NX plugins. So assume you have that PNPM workspace and you have an existing NX workspace that leverages much more the plugins as we have seen just now with the React app and Next app. But now we want to move in one of those apps that come from that PNPM workspace, for instance. So let me show you. So I'm again back here in my PNPM monorepo. Let's say we want to move over that React Vite application to our NX workspace that we have seen before. So let me remove here some of those bigger files and then copy the entire React Vite folder here and move over to our apps folder and paste it in. Now this workspace here uses a single version policy, which is a setup that we prefer with NX, but you can totally also use a multi-version policy, even in this case, by setting up a PNPM workspace in here and have some sort of mixed situation. But I want to go a step further and remove this package.json from our React Vite app entirely. Now notice here, I don't have any specific library set up. So you would need to kind of obviously take care of that to hoist them to the root level package.json and make sure they're aligned. So there's more work needed here. But this is an early version of showing you all what is potentially possible down the road with these new enhanced Project Crystal plugins. So let me remove entirely that package.json. Now, there was also a shared UI package that we had in the PNPM monorepo, which we don't have anymore. So for now, for sake of simplicity, let's just remove that. Now, in order for NX to understand that this is a project, let me copy here the project.json, but we'll keep it simple and empty, basically. So the name here is React Vite. This is the folder. And you can already see now NX console infers all the targets for us. Because it detected that it is a project, it found that there's a Vite config with the different build setups. You can already see our custom configuration, so it read that properly from that Vite config. And now I can go ahead and in this new repo, just run pm nx build react Vite, and it would build my Vite app, as I can also just go ahead and serve that Vite app. So you can see how we copied that over. Now, obviously, this is a more simple example, as I mentioned earlier, but it shows the potential down the road as we keep improving these Project Crystal plugins. Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you, because it is not just potentially about configuring caching and inputs and outputs and kind of syncing that directly from the config file. Plugins can potentially do more for specific situations. So if we go back to our workspace here, and I can choose an arbitrary one, we can see here in the next app, we have this playwright config. And we have in the NX.json a playwright setup configured. And notice I showed it to you with the playwright config, but it works exactly the same way with the Cypress one. Now, if we go in here and choose here the product detail view, we'll see there is a lint target, an end-to-end target, but there's also a specific end-to-end -ci target, which filters or runs on a specific file, in this case, on this example spec file. And what it means is NX is able to not just, or this specific Cypress or Playwright plugin is able to not just generate targets for the whole end-to-end run, but potentially create more fine-grained targets dynamically for each file. So let me show you what happens if I copy here the example file here into example 2. Let's go in here and say example 2. Let's here go to the playwright config file and then open here the project detail view. And now you will see it now has 2 of them generated. So why is this useful? Well, this is useful for being able to distribute at a much fine-grained level. So in this case, for instance, I can say now run many target end-to-end CI, which was that specific target that we've shown. Now let me run it with parallel 1 so I don't get conflicts with serving the project behind the scenes with the same port. And now you can see it runs the end-to-end test for a React app, which is just a single one, but you can see it runs that single CI, that Cypress file, and passes that to the Cypress config. And now it runs the same thing for our next app in the playwright test, running first the example spec and then running the example 2 spec. And again, this doesn't just work in here a workspace which I have generated with NX. Let me switch over here to another one, which is an Epic Stack workspace. And let me add here the playwright plugin. So let me run NX add latest init. This is an npm workspace, so an npm app. Now I don't want to use ESLint, Vite, or Remix. I'm just curious or interested in that playwright sharding. I don't even want to use NX in our package.json, and so let me just set that up. And so once it's configured, let's look at the changes. So what we see here is the NX.json obviously that got generated. We have here NX being installed as a dev dependency as well as the playwright plugin, which we chose to install. And here the playwright plugin is being configured with an end-to-end target name. So if you want to have a quick look of what project here, or what tasks have been inferred here with this project. Now the project name is this one here. Let me double check. Yeah, it matches. So let's open that on web. And so you can again see we get the end-to-end test, but also we get all these individual tests here, which are present here in this Epic Stack test setup. So if we go here in the playwright test folder, you can see all of these. And so again, without even adding anything else, it allows us to run all these end-to-end tests, and it will run them one by one. Now, why is this useful? Well, because usually on CI, a huge end-to-end block are the most problematic one because they need to run in one go. And if you want to distribute tasks, especially across different machines, you always have that big block. Now with this feature, what you can do, or what NX allows you to do, is in combination with NX Cloud allows you to more fine-grained split this up into these individual tasks where it runs the playwright test or Cypress test per file, and it can distribute them much easier in a much more balanced way across different agents. So this gives huge benefits on CI. We've seen examples that go from like 90 minutes down to 10 minutes based on such a distribution mechanism. All right, but so the main core part for NX Crystal is, first of all, introduce more transparency, because now these plugins mostly just pipe through the underlying CLI, so Vite build or Remix CLI and so on. This also reduces the maintenance burden on your end, specifically also because you don't have all these project JSON files potentially in your workspace with this overhead of configuration, but you just have the default setup and you just override what you need to override and customize what you need to customize. And still, we enhance your experience. As we have seen by dropping in Vite, you get automatically the caching configured based on the Vite config. We've seen some examples here of Playwright or Cypress, which works the same way, of automatic almost test sharding. And notice this works for all the tasks, not necessarily just end-to-end tests. It's just the most common one. And we have seen also how such an approach makes adoption much easier. So our goal with Project Crystal is to keep improving it in the coming months. So this is just the first release. And right now we are probably around this area if we look at this balancing graph that we have brought up initially. So it is not exactly the same where NX just picks up your package JSON scripts, but it gives you some more abstraction and some more help already in the sense of configuring automatically caching and all that stuff that we've seen. But we plan to potentially keep improving it a bit more over the next couple of months. But you can still see it will still be kind of like transparent for you in the sense that you can remove it or add it much easier than it was before. So if this sounds interesting, definitely also check out our YouTube channel where we have much more deeper dives into some of these aspects, and we will keep publishing them over the next couple of months. And get in touch. Thanks.